This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. Sign up now and get our streaming service, Nebula, absolutely free, where you can get exclusive TLDR videos and the extended version of our new show, The Daily Briefing. Late last week, the Russian army finally captured the town of Severodonetsk, one of the last remaining Ukrainian holdouts in the Luhansk Oblast. Over the last few days, they've redirected their attention to the neighbouring town of Lysychansk, with Russian forces closing in from the north, south and east. So, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the most recent developments, what might happen next, and why this war doesn't look like it'll end anytime soon. So, let's start with the recent developments. As we detailed in our previous video, for the last few weeks, the Russian army has been focusing its efforts on Severodonetsk, a town with a pre-war population of about 100,000 in the west of the Luhansk Oblast. The Russians reached the outskirts of the town back in early March, but struggled to make significant inroads for the first month or so. Originally, it looked like they were going to go for a pincer movement, with forces moving north from Papanza to cut off Ukrainian supply lines into Severodonetsk. But this plan was scuppered after the advance from Papanza stalled, with Russian forces unable to overwhelm Ukrainians at the nearby town of Zoloty. Instead, the Russians decided to go for a frontal assault, coming from the town of Rubizhny, which sits a few kilometers north of Severodonetsk. When they first entered the town in early June, Ukrainian forces staged a successful counterattack, pushing them back to the outskirts. But unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the sheer size of Russia's manpower and artillery eventually overwhelmed them. And on Saturday, the governor of the Luhansk Oblast admitted that the Russians had captured all of Severodonetsk. What remained of the Ukrainian army in Severodonetsk retreated to the neighbouring town of Lysychansk, a town of similar size that sits just to the east. The two towns are separated by the Severodonetsk River, and the four bridges connecting the two have all been destroyed. But this won't have provided too much defence for the Ukrainians, because Russian forces are now advancing on Lysychansk from not just Severodonetsk, but also the south and the north. In the south, having successfully captured Zoloty on Thursday, Russian forces advanced into southern Lysychansk, reaching the Lysychansk gelatin factory on Saturday. In the north, Russian forces can advance from Kreminna, which they captured in April, and which sits on the west bank of the Severodonetsk River. Russian forces might also decide to move north from Papanza to cut off supply lines into Lysychansk, possibly presaging a siege. Ukraine only controls a few remaining major roads running into Lysychansk. So, if Russian forces move north from Papanza, they could cut off Ukrainian forces in the town. On Saturday, the governor of Luhansk actually warned that Ukrainian forces might have to retreat prematurely to avoid getting cut off by Russians. You get the idea. Lysychansk is essentially surrounded, and we can expect Russia to take the town sometime soon. Now, it's worth stressing that while this has symbolic value insofar as it means that Russia will have captured the last Ukrainian holdout in Luhansk, this isn't a particularly impressive military victory. It's taken them more than a month to capture a few kilometers of territory and a couple of small towns. And it's been reported that Russian commander Alexander Dvornikov has been sacked for failing to meet Moscow's June 10th deadline for capturing Severodonetsk. So what happens next? Well, if Russia takes Lysychansk, the largest remaining Ukrainian-occupied urban areas in Donbass will be Kramatorsk and Slovansk, two towns in the north of the Donetsk Oblast with pre-war populations of 160,000 and 100,000 respectively. The Russian advance here will probably take some time, given they're both heavily fortified about 70 kilometers away from Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. If the Russians do try and take the towns, however, they'll probably go for another pincer movement akin to the one they're currently trying in Lysychansk, which will take significantly longer than a full frontal assault. Russian forces will probably try to move south from Izium, where an estimated 20,000 or so troops have been stationed for months, and north from Bakhmut, a town with a pre-war population of about 70,000 that sits 35 kilometers southeast of Kramatorsk. Bakhmut is currently under Ukrainian control, and Russia has apparently suffered heavy losses trying to make inroads into the town. But it's being slowly surrounded and has suffered through heavy artillery barrages over the last few days, which suggests it's the Russians' next target. Taking Kramatorsk and Sloviansk will be no easy task. The two towns are better fortified than Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and the Ukrainians will have received more Western aid by the time the Russians get there. If the Russians do succeed here, however, they'll have established occupational control over basically all of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, the two territories claimed by the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, and recognised by Russia back in February. Unfortunately, even if this happens, a quick end to the war still looks unlikely. Even if Kyiv agreed to hand over Donbass, which won't happen anyway, Russian forces still occupy large swathes of territory in southern Ukraine, and there's little appetite in the West for a compromise anytime soon. Macron, Draghi and Scholz, who previously represented the more dovish contingent on the continent, all visited Kyiv a couple of weeks ago to pledge their support for Ukraine and its EU candidacy status. Macron, who had only a few days earlier warned NATO about, quote, humiliating Putin, declared that France was unambiguously on Ukraine's side, while a French diplomatic source told The Economist that France wanted Ukraine to achieve, quote, total victory, including Crimea. The terrifying lethality of this war doesn't bode well either. Contrary to popular imaginations, interstate wars are usually pretty short and not particularly lethal. According to analysis by the Correlates of War project, most wars last less than 4 months and suffer an average of less than 50 deaths per day. For context, excluding the 7 years of low-intensity warfare that preceded Russia's invasion, the war in Ukraine has just passed the 4-month mark, with no signs of slowing down, and is currently seeing somewhere between 200 and 300 deaths per day. This makes it significantly more deadly and probably longer than the majority of interstate wars. With its attritional nature and limited territorial movement, the war in Ukraine is beginning to look less like the US invasion of Iraq and more like the Iran-Iraq war of the 80s or the Ethiopia-Eritrea war of the 90s. This is bad news because both wars claimed a terrifying number of lives for basically no reason. The 8-year Iran-Iraq war claimed the lives of an estimated 500,000 people and essentially ended in a stalemate with little territorial movement. The Eritrean-Ethiopian war only lasted 2 years, but claimed the lives of some 120,000 people and doomed the region to years of poverty and oppression, with little territorial gains on either side. The point we're making is that the war in Ukraine is both lethal and attritional, and the historical precedents for this sort of war are pretty terrifying. If you want to be updated on this story as it plays out, then you should subscribe to the Daily Briefing, our show where we break down 5 stories you need to know about in just 5 minutes. You can watch on the Daily Briefing YouTube channel or listen by searching for the podcast. But if you want the extended version of the show, that's an extra 10 minutes every day and an ad-free experience, then you'll need to sign up to our streaming service, Nebula. There you'll also find exclusive TLDR videos which never make it to YouTube and our latest videos ad-free. Now, if you're interested, I have good news because we've partnered with CuriosityStream, the home of the best documentaries online. Thanks to them, you can get both streaming services, CuriosityStream for the docs and Nebula for the bonus TLDR, for less than $15 a year. That's a wild deal and a 26% discount on their already low price. So get yourself a ton of documentaries and exclusive content from your favourite creators, including the Daily Briefing Extended Edition, by signing up using the link below. Thanks for your support.